Hello, everyone, and welcome to Screenwalks. I'm Marco Demutis, digital curator at Photomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland. And together with John Uriarte at the Photographers Gallery in London, we have created this collaborative program of fortnightly live-streamed events. Through Screenwalks, we are interested in investigating the changing role of the photographic image in its networked and digital forms. Each event is led by an artist, researcher, or a curator, a combination of these, who accompanies the audience to the spaces where their core practice takes place. Screenwalks can be a live performance, a peek behind the scenes of an artwork, or a guided online tour, among other possible formats. We have hosted more than 80 Screenwalk events so far, and you can find video recordings of each one of them on our website and YouTube channel. All publicly accessible for free, and you can browse through this archive through tags on screenwalks.com or through curated playlists on YouTube. Please remember that if you have found Screenwalks useful for your professional or personal interests, you can subscribe to folders. For €7, you will support the program and its artists, and also get your personalized folder on folders.screenwalks.com. There you will receive files and extra content from the artists and researchers of Screenwalks. Finally, some housekeeping information. Your microphone should be muted to avoid noise disturbances. If it's still on, please mute it now. We are recording and we will be archiving this event. Please use the public chat to ask questions. We will bring them to Lucia at the end of the event. Feel free to send a private message as well to John or me, and we'll bring them to a discussion with today's artist, Lucia, at the end, as I said. Thank you.
And hello from me too. I'm John Uriarte, curator of Screenworks with the Photographers Gallery in London. And today we are starting a new season of the program of Screenworks, looking at the weather. Recent catastrophic events such as the wildfires in LA or the floods in Valencia, which mixed with some political mismanagement caused over 200 deaths, have attracted worldwide attention, pointing at climate change as a probable cause behind their unusual destructive power. This environmental phenomena is happening while the tech industry has successfully marketed artificial intelligence as a solution to manage every and each of the problems and needs of contemporary society: entertainment, finance, healthcare, love, food, energy, you name it. Meteorology, which is the atmospheric science focused on weather forecasting, predates by millennia even the methodology currently being used by AI. First, you gather data, then you process it using statistical calculations to end making predictions. Starting at the end of the 18th century, scientists had access to large amounts of data to create weather models in order to calculate a forecast. Weather models rely on statistical analysis drawn from observation, a solid method as long as the phenomena follows a stable pattern. However, as scientists keep on warning us since a few decades ago, the impact of the human species in the planet is taking a heavy toll on the climate, rapidly changing its patterns and provoking unexpected developments. Weather forecast, and particularly AI-based modeling, which is known for reinforcing patterns that has been trained on, is often unable to predict such events that might have rarely occurred before. Today, we are really excited to have Lucia Rebolino sharing her research on AI foundation models in climate forecasting and their failure to predict extreme events deviating from historical observations. Rebolino will explore the internet as a space to explore weather tracking tools and to examine the collected data, challenging assumptions about the atmosphere as an archival space made out of automatically collected human data. Lucia Rebolino is an architect and computational designer, weaving science and art into counter-cartography, data, and web-based aesthetics. She is a researcher at Forensic Architecture in London, and her work on weather and prediction has been featured in Influx Architecture, and she has lectured at Columbia University, the AA, the TU Delft, among other cultural and art institutions. Lucia holds a Master of Architecture from Polytechnic of Turin and a Master of Science in Computational Design Practices from Columbia, where she also collaborated with Center for Spatial Research in New York, exploring how computational methods can mediate between different design practices. Dear Lucia, we are really looking forward to your screen walk, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the great presentation and also introduction on the topic, which is very much like accurate on what I'm going to talk today. Indeed, so I would like to start talking about like the atmosphere conceived as an architectural object. So the atmosphere in a sense function as a data center, holding a geological record of its own transformation and sedimenting the traces of technological residues. The feedback loop between the technological infrastructures used to sense, measure, and predict the climate and the weather itself suggests that the very system designed to observe and predict the atmosphere are in turn influencing and shaping it. These technologies do not just passively measure, they interact and they transform, marking the territories that aim to capture. In particular, this research exposes the inherent omissions and distortion in the relationship between climate science, technology, and the territory. It examines the ecological and political implication of weather data, so how data are collected, transmitted, and stored. So while this topic are scientific in nature, climate prediction always involves concepts like scale and models, which are both inherently tied to design and architectural practices. So as tool of representation, scale and models both can allow deeper connection between different branches of science, while computational models, in a sense, enable this interdisciplinary collaboration between science and design. So I think it's from this specific lens that I want to screen walk today. So it's going to be a walk on shifting perspectives, navigating through layers and scale of information. So weather has always been one of our oldest desires, particularly the ability to model it. Scientists and mathematicians have spent ages trying to model the future. And while predictions about the future are, of course, scientifically interesting, it is when models forecast events on Earth that people pay the most of attention. What you can see on my screen right now are pixels of clouds, more specifically water vapor. Water vapor is a ubiquitous and dynamic component of Earth's atmosphere. It's constantly shifting in response to an intricate interplay of physical and chemical processes. It exists in an invisible gaseous state, moving through the atmosphere in varying concentration, shaped by local global weather patterns, but most of all, especially right now, by human influence. Microwave emissions from molecules such as oxygen and water vapor are used by meteorologists to identify and analyze weather systems and to develop a vertical profile of temperature and humidity. Indeed, the ability of microwaves to penetrate through clouds without being absorbed makes them an especially useful tool for analyzing clouds' internal structure and eventually predicting the future development of storm and extreme weather events. So if we shift focus from looking up at the sky to examining the machine that observes it, we might begin to understand how our vision of the future is shaped. Even the most complex systems of prediction are built by people. They exist in real places and evolve according to human intentions. Going a bit back in time, despite progress in meteorological studies, data limitations hindered accurate prediction in the early 20th century, prompting efforts to create systems for data collection and storage. In 1922, Lewis Fried Richardson, lately described by his biographer as possessing an unorthodox intelligence, articulated the vision of a forecast factory, a building capable of processing vast amounts of data simultaneously. And his idea foreshadowed the parallel computing system that power modern weather models today. Weather forecasting has never been the achievement of a single government, but a continuous international effort built upon the verticality of the atmosphere and political borders. There is no future forecasting without observation, and no observation without the infrastructure to support it. After millennia of logging the Earth, we finally produce an entire system of like satellites, technology, instruments, and sensor and computer that are linked by a purpose built-in telecommunication system designed to connect them all. But the more we wire, the larger the infrastructure becomes, and with it, the immaterial promises grows. So on my screen here, a weather ground station. These few little antennas are where information related to water vapor and precipitation is gathered from an intricate system of sensing and communication satellites, then sent to Earth. And Earth is here. It's in White Sands in New Mexico. So the architecture of forecasting relies on complex data, systems all tied to spatial coordinates. It's what makes accurate, timely weather information possible. If we focus on a single dot, a fixed point of longitude and latitude, it feels solid and certain, but at the end, it's just a set of coordinates. But as we scale up, it dissolves into a larger system, where certainty, especially about event location, begins to blur. The world is filled with sensors, constantly measuring, storing, and mapping data. In weather prediction, proximity matters. Events are shaped by where sensors are placed. And for centuries, mapping has been about control, pinning things down, making the unknown legible. Interesting to know is also that in the early 1900s, the first weather maps weren't just a dynamic structure of air currents of storm, but instead maps of weather station and maps of infrastructure, a rigid grid of observation point marking where extreme events made landfall and could be measured. For this infrastructure, monitoring water vapor and understanding atmospheric moisture aren't just technicalities. They're essential for anticipating hurricanes and cyclones. The moisture around the storm shapes its trajectory, its rainfall, and its floods. Ultimately, it dictates the scale of the catastrophe. Take October 7, 2024, less than six months ago. Hurricane Milton was undergoing one of the fastest intensification ever recorded in the Atlantic. Not a single weather model has predicted that it would be escalated this fast. It was pushing up against the very limits of Earth's atmosphere over warm oceans water can produce. But in the era of climate change, weather patterns shift unpredictably. Milton's path was within the cone of uncertainty until it changed, spiraling into a record-breaking disaster. Forecasting technology has advanced, refining numerical and spatial models to better predict extreme events. And yet, billion-dollar weather disasters in the US keep rising. Because it's not just about better forecast, it's about a changing world. Storms push further, extremes become more unpredictable, harder to pin down. If our reality is increasingly mediated and profoundly altered by digital technology, the question now is, what technologies of prediction are shaping what futures? New systems are being designed to engage with deeper timelines, challenging traditional notions of predictability and embracing uncertainty as a condition of possibility, which is an entry point of exploring sort of counter practices. In questioning predictability, I've been investigating where new models of technologies are leading us. Weather agencies today are facing a dual force, the rapid pace of technological development and the growing demand of predictability. Together, these forces have radically transformed how we understand the natural processes that govern our world. In 2024, with the rise of new AI systems and other powerful machine learning technologies, one of the most significant developments in the weather community was the announcement that IBM and NASA are building an AI foundation model for weather and climate prediction. The goal is to improve the speed, accuracy, and accessibility of weather forecasting and climate application. But sometimes breakouts in math and computing open new pathways forwards. But it's also easy to get carried away, to place too much trust in the power and elegance of modeling. So how these models are actually built, how much should we trust them, and why? The strength of these models lies in their ability, when they're prompted, to generate prediction with minimal human input. And the essential ingredient is data. So weather forecasting agencies have begun using deep learning models known as AI emulators, trained on historical weather patterns to generate forecasts. And thanks to this advancement, AI-driven weather prediction has suddenly emerged as a serious competitor to conventional forecasting methods. However, as every tool has its own limitations, the past is not always a great predictor of the future, especially when the climate is warming as rapidly as it is doing today. In fact, current AI models often miss extreme events. This tendency is a known problem for AI models, which are trained to ignore outliers. Loss functions minimize the chance of making big mistakes, but consequently, they can also miss extreme events. Weather forecasting has seen a significant improvement in recent years, largely due to advances in satellite observation, where nearly 99% of the data that supercomputers process today come from satellites, with about 90% of that being assimilated into numerical weather prediction models. These models take observation, convert them into mathematical representation of the atmosphere, and advance them forward in time to predict the weather. But what if the phenomenon you want to model is simply unmodelable? So lately I've been thinking about the uncertainty embedded in climate models, their dependence on what we believe to be immutable physical laws. These models merge historical data with present-day observation to generate predictions. But how might they break in the future? So what are the outliers here? So just in the last few months, the unpredictability of natural forces revealed itself again. So Milton, still officially categorized as a Category 5 hurricane, has exceeded the maximum wind speed allowed within the model for that category. The article I'm showing was written, this is the speed. This article I'm showing was written even before Milton, back in February 2024, right after similar record-breaking storms, underscoring just how quickly these extremes are becoming the norm. It's hard to ignore these kind of shifts. They're not only more frequent, but also force us to reconsider how we understand and predict the climate. Hurricanes are intensifying so rapidly that scientists are proposing a Category 6. So for context, when meteorologists introduced the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is the one to measure the intensity of storms, in 1970s, a Category 5 storm represented the absolute extreme, like a sort of oblivion. But as the planet warms, storms are increasingly surpassing what was once considered the upper limit of destruction. And the past is no longer a reliable source to read into the future. So I will admit that I'm still trying to grasp the technicalities of how these AI models work, particularly in weather prediction. But I've begun to envision these models spatially, thinking about them in terms of scale, which, as I mentioned before, is inherently connected to design architecture, which are fields where I feel more comfortable in. And through these points, different questions arise. How do we measure this new technological space we're building? It's not just a data-driven space. It's an architecturally significant one that reshapes how we engage with weather, climate, and even the future itself. And this brings me to another critical point. So if data, if unreal data is, if models that ignore if these models can ignore outliers, and can still produce real effects, why do we trust these models? Why do we even trust science? We continue to rely on them because they're based on patterns, on the repetition of known events. But what about the unknown? We need to reconsider how we approach the complexities of weather and climate, not just through conventional models, but through new counter practices, one that embraces uncertainty and allows for unpredictability. This requires a shift in our thinking and a new methodological approach that moves beyond prediction and towards exploring the gaps in our understanding. So in this sense, models become more than just tools. They become a framework for thinking about the future, challenging traditional notion of predictability. If infrastructure is the architecture that allows a model to learn and represent complex patterns in data, then data itself is the foundation on which these models operate. Scientific reticence refers to the tendency of scientists to be cautious in their statements or to understate their findings, often due to the rigorous standards of proof required within the scientific community. But this reticence also suggests something deeper, a hesitation to fully explore or articulate ideas that fall outside conventional discourse. And it reminds me of a recent conversation I had with a scientist who unexpectedly told me that accuracy is not always the best way to communicate or represent science. That sometimes the most interesting and important details lie within anomalies, in weather, but also in the data itself. So how we engage with models and data. The role of open science in reshaping our approach to uncertainty is a key point when we talk about model prediction. In a world where our reliance on data is growing, yet our ability to decode it remains limited, and transparency and accessibility are more crucial than ever. In this context, NASA is making significant effort. They're committing to building an inclusive open science community over the next decade, with the aim of sharing software, data, and knowledge, including algorithms, documentation, and models, as early as possible in the scientific process. So NASA's Earth Science Data System, ESDS, ensures that these resources are fully available to any user, prompting the open sharing of metadata, research results, and even the source code used to generate and analyze the data. This openness brings together collaboration across discipline, and over the past decade, NASA open source code have been utilizing more than 1,000 projects. That was right. Never mind. Thanks to these open source codes, retrieving images from optical and radar satellite has become a new and valuable resource. But as with many things in science, there is a layer of complexity that often make these vast amounts of data difficult to access or interpret. Most of us might be empowered to access this information, yet we often lack the tools or knowledge to decode it. This data visualization structure what I believe is called a tree format, and was built by NASA to organize and simplify its vast data archive into categories. It explored the concept of open science and open data, focusing on NASA Open Data Portal, which promises 10,000 of datasets available for you. Yet in practice, these datasets are so deeply branched and compressed into complex structure that their supposed openness become very exclusive. I've limited this opening to just one iteration because the actual file of NASA is thousands of branches, and I didn't want to fail this screen work, but just so you know that it's supposed to go in a loop. This floating open folder is a data visualization experiment that navigates the challenges of accessibility, image data, and archives. We continue to rely on models, algorithms, and massive data sets to navigate the uncertain climate future, we need to rethink how we access and interact with this information. So keeping the data that built our current climate understanding as a frame, there is a concept that I want to bring in. Richardson, the same unorthodox intelligence we talked about earlier, proposed an idea that feels strictly relevant today. This concept of a mirror world, where a digital system reflects physical reality, anticipated data storage, and computational technologies we rely on nowadays. In weather prediction by numerical processes, he wrote, "Perhaps someday in the dim future, it will be possible to advance the computation faster than the weather advances, but that is a dream." The Richardson dream, as it's now known in climate science, has materialized. Today, climate models and digital twins are not just tools for prediction, but systems for governance, where data-driven simulations shape decision-making and expose the entanglement of technology, politics, and the weather itself. As I mentioned earlier, the space of climate prediction is one that has been profoundly shaped by technological advancement, stretching across a diverse spectrum of innovation. And when I say spectrum, I mean this quite literally. Research organizations rely heavily on the measurement of water vapor particles vibrating in the atmosphere, tracking within the 24 GHz frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum. However, in recent years, telecommunication companies have begun to use the same frequency band for the high-band 5G network, which directly obstructs the collection of atmospheric data. These overlaps has sparked a political conflict over the use of these open frequency bands, a contested multidimensional space that has now become a new arena of experimentation. But like Earth, the frequency bands are a finite space, and around 24 GHz and beyond, this space is called a green field, a playground where new technologies are trying to settle in. By landing on Earth, I want to give a simple and clear example of the sometimes destructive power of water vapor within the atmosphere. So on August 23, 2017, the National Weather Service issued a hurricane warning, and Texas declared a state of emergency for 30 counties. Hurricane Harvey was incredible in how quickly intensified as it was approaching the land. Now let's imagine what might happen then if we already had this proximity issue between the spectrum. So these are the data of the final trajectory that the hurricane had in 2017. And this is the hypothetical data it would have had today if there has been this interference. So 70% of lost data from satellites and 30% of reduction of forecastability. So if we don't have the water vapor picture, how we can isolate the other potential sources of or sinks of heating or cooling of the atmosphere? So visualizing the alarming scale of the current conflict, it's important to define the political aspect of this space. On May 13, 2019, concerns were raised about protecting satellite measurements from interference caused by certain wireless signals. Officials urged that no final license be issued for the 24 gigahertz spectrum until safeguards were in place to protect critical weather and climate data. So for years, this debate played out in official reports and policy discussion, but more recent have also more recently has moved into a public platform, bringing the conflict into a broader societal conversation. By February 2022, the issues gained enough momentum that an international conference was held to promote the scientific use of the spectrum and address concern about the interference, particularly with the expansion of new technology. So when defining the policy side of this issue, it's essential to understand the scale of the space in question and how it is measured. One of the key responsibilities of a regulatory agency is managing airwaves. And over time, different strategies have been used to open access to private companies. One of the primary methods has been auctioning off spectrum rights, allowing businesses to purchase and use specific frequency bands. So frequency allocation is the process of dividing and regulating the electromagnetic spectrum into radio frequency bands, typically managed by governments worldwide. But the political conflict we are dealing with, the one that I mentioned earlier, fits into a layer that is so thin that it's almost imperceptible. It's a finite space and it's 24 gigahertz. So international and national regulation have reserved a portion of the microwave spectrum specifically for passive observation. Passive remote sensing in these bands is the primary technique used to improve the accuracy of numerical weather prediction and is essential for determining the state of the atmosphere. The 24 gigahertz band is particularly sensitive to total column of water vapor, as shown in this graph. For fundamental physical reasons, collecting atmospheric water vapor data cannot simply shift to another frequency, but telecommunication, internet, and 5G could move. And that is exactly what science are going about. So it's important to say that the weather forecasting community is not against 5G, and neither am I. On the contrary, faster telecommunication will ultimately benefit to climate forecasting. But the issue isn't about choosing one over the other. It's about the fact that these two infrastructures cannot coexist in the same space. Critical proximity is primarily driven by the physical and spatial closeness of this system in acquiring and receiving data. This tension plays out between two key observational scales, weather radar on the ground and weather satellites above. While it may seem unexpected to someone, the Earth's atmosphere naturally emits microwave, and it's through passive remote sensing within these microwave bands that we're able to improve the accuracy of numerical weather predictions. This technique of listening to atmospheric emission is essential for determining the state of the atmosphere, especially in case of hurricanes, where rapid intensification can dramatically shift the landscape of prediction. So the water vapor frequency is mapped as a climate medium, and this critical layer is investigated from 2 points. So the view from above relies on satellites to collect data and measure energy radiated from the Earth at water vapor frequency. Two main types of satellites are used in weather monitoring. Geostationary operational environmental satellite, also known as GOES, and the Joint Polar Satellite System, JPSS. So GOES satellites stay fixed over one spot of the Earth equator, providing continuous real-time monitoring of weather patterns in that region. They capture satellite imagery, track storms, and monitor atmospheric conditions, making them especially useful for watching hurricanes develop and giving early warnings. JPSS satellite, on the other hand, move into a polar orbit, circling the Earth from pole to pole. This allows them to scan the atmosphere vertically, covering the entire planet over time. Instead of actively sending out signals like radar, JPSS satellites use passive sensor. They silently listen to nitrogen microwave emission from water vapor at frequency like 24 GHz. These signals reveal moisture levels, cloud formation, and atmospheric instability, and are key data for creating numerical weather prediction models, which help to forecast future weather. So within this framework that I've been talking about so far of action and feedback, so what, for who is familiar with Bruno Latour would have referred as like imbrication, I want to return to the structure of what are outliers. So as mentioned in the beginning, AI as a statistical model is fundamentally constrained by its training data. It operates by learning from past patterns, reinforcing what has already been observed while smoothing over anomalies. This structure makes AI particularly fragile when it comes to extreme weather events, those rare high-impact disruptions that push the atmosphere to its breaking point, defying statistical norms and disrupting entire systems. But the problem is deeper than just omission. AI-driven climate models often function through a process of grounding, rely on past observation to calibrate their future predictions. In traditional numerical weather prediction, models in traditional American weather prediction models, this happens through data assimilation, where new observations are continually fed into the system to refine its understanding of the present and adjust the models of the future. But in AI models, which operate statistically rather than dynamically, these adjustments are filtered through historical norms. This is where a fundamental paradox emerges. Extreme events, by definition, exist at the edge of statistical possibility. They break patterns rather than fit them. AI models, which use past weather data to define the scope of future scenarios, can end up suggesting that the very signals that indicate an oncoming extreme events sometimes can create the most critical atmospheric shifts, which are only recognized when it's too late, when a storm like Hurricane Mitchell rapidly intensifying beyond what any models foresaw. So the past is not always a prediction of the future, yet many AI-driven climate models assume continuity, treating change as an extension of historical trends rather than a rupture into unknown territory. This creates a dangerous cycle. Climate prediction becomes an endless loop for calculation, calibrating and deferral, turning AI into a mechanism of inaction rather than a tool for intervention and responsiveness. In New Dark Age, James Brittle, reflecting on Richardson, the guy we've been talking about a lot today, dream of a forecast factory, writes that the history of computational thinking begins with the weather. Today, that history converts with the present, as the premise of prediction collide with our accelerating obsession with data. Yet uncertainty, mathematically and scientifically, is not a void, but a measure of precisely what we do know. And as computational systems expand, they do not dissolve uncertainty. Instead, they shape its contours, revealing with increasing clarity the vastness of what remains unknown and unpredictable. There was supposed to be a final effect that it's not happening, but my presentation is actually finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucia. We are imagining the effect now, and it was a fantastic presentation. It was a fantastic work that I think we experienced also for the very first time in terms of this format on ScreenWalks. It's like, how do you define it for starters? Like, is this a in-browser lecture performance that combines an academic essay with like net art? How do you have a very interesting practice, I think, no? Like, can we start from there?
Thank you. I much appreciate the comment. I feel it started mostly like while I was getting passionate about these specific topics and the way of like the complex way they are represented, like especially like data kind of driven aesthetics. And as I'm not a major fan of like to like this simulation data kind of fluid, I mean, they're cool, but I also kind of wanted to like try to shape a different aesthetics, and somehow like internet and the web becomes a good medium to store this information. And also especially one interesting aspect, as I was like showing before, is this like great potentiality that exists in certain folders to like, and certain like website, like for instance, like the NASA Open Science that I've been criticizing. It could be an amazing tool, and it's just like these very complex branches of how information are stored. I think it's also, it becomes sort of day-to-day activity to me, like navigate into the branches. So I think from that learning, I kind of want to explore a new narrative that, again, like it branches out in different sort of more of web aesthetics.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I mean, I also encourage now, of course, the audience to add their questions. We're going to give them some time, maybe also to post questions in the chat. But in the meantime, maybe I can bring some questions that I got already, even before you started the talk. There was somebody who was so excited. It was like Adino Tirtakusuma. I hope I don't butcher your name. Who was writing, as a data engineer in insurance, have you thought about presenting this work in the insurance sector? One of the challenges in insurance is showing the impact of prediction to the individual homes and other property. I thought this kind of visualization might be very fitting. So maybe, yeah, something about how do you see this kind of visualization maybe in relations to other fields like insurance, for example? I think that's a kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Like I've been talking with like some people recently, like they have been mentioning like also this concept of like weather derivatives that in a way is like connected with like insurance. Like it's definitely like an area that I've been not like diving into, but yeah, but I have a friend who was like excited about it, and it sounds like sounds like potential. Like I guess these are at least there are topics that like share like same interest in a matter of like research. I would be interested in understanding on a matter of like aesthetic, like and visualization, how this kind of like aesthetics, which I feel they kind of bridge maybe a bit between disciplines. Like I'm not even sure how a proper weather scientist would appreciate this kind of like this kind of visualization, even though like I mentioned it during the lecture itself, but I've been recently working close to scientists from NASA, and we were talking, and I was like mentioning to him, hey, listen, am I gonna use your data, but not in the way you expect, like, and then he was like, no, it's like one of the main thing that we say between like scientific visualizer is like that accuracy is not the key. Like most of the thing, like when you see some visualization of like this massive hurricane that like seems like super high, like they're not that high, but it's just the way you kind of like scale them to like give the idea in the visualization itself of the impact and the power that it's inside like this specific event. So I find interesting how like also scientists kind of mention this matter of accuracy, which I guess comes often when you work with data, like when you just work with data and you have to represent them and you have to deal with like aesthetic and accuracy, which sometimes they don't always overlap. So
yeah, thank you from my side too. It was a wonderful presentation. I
thank you, John.
enjoyed a lot, how you presented it on the skin work. I was wondering, and while you were talking, if like also considering that all these issues that AI models have to predict, you know, this kind of phenomena. If we have somehow, and also because you mentioned interferences and you talked a lot about data sources, and I was wondering if you feel like we have reached certain like data peak in the sense of like there was, I guess that also in weather forecasting, over like time, the whole like the first objective was to gather data to be able to understand the weather, and in order to create these models. Do you think like, do we have like too much data right now that is like not like, instead of being useful, being like a problem itself?
So that's interesting, because I feel I don't have like I don't have a specific answer, but like there is also the issue of like this now, it's like present of going issue about how like data centers to like power this like AI model are like actually also changing like these like weather patterns in a sense. So it could be that like in a sense like more data we source, more kind of we affect the weather, more like it creates like this sort of like feedback loop, you know, we want to read the weather, we want to improve technology, we kind of like wire up the earth with like satellites data center and to store this amount of like precious data to predict the future, but then the future itself change because of this action we do. So I think there is like this feedback loop continuously. And another thing related to the interference and data itself, it's this very fascinating thing that becomes like an obsession like a few years ago, was like the spectrum, like how this electromagnetic spectrum, which I was reading, and it's something that is, I mean, it's invisible. We cannot really see or touch it, but at the same time, it's so valuable. And then people like specific section of this spectrum have been like auctioned for like $1,000, and then like private companies are buying them maybe to run their like technology or like whatever. But like that's interesting how, and again, I'm not like I think I'm not an expert in these specific fields, but like what I found interesting in finding the overlap on how like the practice where I'm working with, which is more related to like spatial practices and computation, can be related to that. So I was thinking, okay, what if I found very fascinating thinking about like, oh, water vapor, that it's like the key of like any kind of extreme weather events, like hurricane or like severe storms, but they can only emit at that frequency. Like this is physical law, there's no way we can change it. And so the satellite can only map them at that frequency because it's what like the water vapor particles are emitting. And then on the world, we're wiring with like our super fast speed 5G technologies, which again, like it's great for many things, but we're also kind of like challenging this natural process that we cannot govern. So I think, yeah, I really like this like concept of like this loop between us that want to like get better technologies, more powerful, faster. We're affecting the weather and we're affecting the climate, and we also like live in the consequences in the end. So that's
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of related to this comment by Saiba Jabbar. Hi, Saiba, former skinwalker too, that just said that data science fiction, in the sense of like we produce so much data, and the process of creating or like extracting all that data has such an impact that sort of creates futures, let's say. No,
yeah.
it's like some other realities, no, that can be. Yeah, that can be a thing today. I was also thinking on images, as we both work on photographic institutions, on like how much of the data that you rely on from your work comes from images, like from visual surfaces, or if there's visual, like what's the importance or the relevance of the visual surface nowadays to train all these models and to predict the weather forecast, or if it has gone like totally abstract.
Yeah, you mean like what kind of information feed the system?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like they're mostly like the same data that, like as far as my understanding, again, I think it's like most of the data that we use to feed this numerical weather prediction model, which are like made so far from like supercomputers, and then like in more, I would say like traditional computational way. But so as far as my understanding, these are like the same data, but then because of the foundation of how this model works and the fact that it's like their statistical model, And extreme, again, another important thing is that these extreme weather events, I was talking to an expert in like hurricane studies, and she was mentioning how, if you think about it, like in the, let's say in the US, there are like, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say something like, maybe there are like 20 per year, like strong ones.
Mhm.
And then of these 20, few of them are like very high category. But then imagine, and only few of them made landfall, which means how much data do we have historical to process in these models to then predict the next category 6 hurricane. So I think I'm sure it's something
Mhm.
that like as technology is improving, like also new kind of techniques of like dealing with uncertainty, this uncertainty are gonna rise. But what was interesting to me was like reading this article about IBM and NASA like less than a year ago, where they were launching this amazing thing. And then just in the last part of the research kind of paper, there was written, yeah, but we might also miss hurricanes, which was like, that's great, but it sounds that like outliers at the end of the day, that they're like what influence much our our lives. So that I just found it's where it started, all this kind of research, like out of these interferences also in the way we talk about technology and data.
Speaking of outliers, actually, I received another direct message from Adino during the middle of the talk, who was asking, you mentioned the use of AI in predicting weather events, but they still fail to catch extreme events. Are there any other way to better predict these extreme events, which by nature is an outlier, or should we treat them as an unknown risk, so to say, totally unpredictable?
So I think how we predict a weather, like one hurricane right now, in a kind of workflow, as it's been also explained to me, is that we start looking, like there's like observational like data and activity that comes at the beginning. So there are like supercomputers that like look at these satellite imagery, where they're like images of the cloud and like how the cloud formation changes over time, and then they start to like identify anomalies. So that's how this thing started. So maybe like already from like a far perspective, few days before, scientists and these computers are kind of like they are trained to understand when these things might gonna like change, and like how can it change. And this is what happened with this like cone of uncertainty. So cone of uncertainty is an interesting concept. I don't know if you've ever seen those kind of like spaghetti diagram. No, it's funny because I'm Italian and I'm talking about spaghetti, but it's also it's like a maze of like several lines, and these are all the possible paths that the hurricane can take. And that's interesting because it's already kind of like a sense of uncertainty that we have in detecting these extreme weather events. Although
The tropical season.
So I was looking for the spaghetti diagram. I couldn't resist.
you got yeah. Everyone is looking spaghetti diagram. But it's so on also like these events are already fall into this realm of uncertainty because they're part of this cone. But these models I was reading that are kind of like good in a sense to like predict what is the possible path in between these lines, but what they're not good in predicting is the strength and how the strength would change over the path, which then is what is important for us to understand like exactly how strong these weather events are going to be at what point of their path and when exactly it's going to happen. So there is first of all this kind of like satellite weather analysis, and then as soon as like this event is making its way over the land, start into action also like weather radar, or like there are like aircraft. There is a specific mission of aircraft that I'm talking about US right now because it's where I have a bit more knowledge of how it works. But again, it's interesting how I was mentioning the about like weather, like mapping the weather is like still this like international effort that like, but I don't know exactly how, if it works differently in Europe or like in other parts of the world, but like in US they have this specific like aircraft mission that like starts every time there might be gonna be an hurricane, and they start to like map the vertical profile of these events. And this is how then we get like data on like the pressure, the humidity, the wind speed of these events. So there are different in the space. There is like satellite. There is this aircraft. Sometimes there are even like on the ocean. There are like boats or vessels. And then as soon as they arrive on land, they're like radar. And all together, they work in like predicting how, when, and how strong these events it's gonna be.
No, I like the whole thing about the spaghetti also because of somehow they predict uncertainty. So it's like instead of being certain of something, like showing up and trying to describe the like not knowing what's gonna happen somehow. So and that's also a nice change for science prediction, and it's maybe a little bit related to the comment on the chat that I'm gonna read just for the people who might be following us on Twitch and don't have access to the chat. So Leah says, I'm interested in what you said about how the more data we have, the clearer it becomes that what data we don't have or what we don't and we don't know anything about. Maybe this is one place where art and artistic imaging comes in to be a context where the data doesn't make sense, doesn't give us that information. To remind us that as important as the data is, it can't always give us a complete picture. I'm really fascinated by that tension.
And I really love this concept, and that's I absolutely agree with this comment. Like that's again what I was also mentioning before, that sometimes anomalies in data are where information comes, like, or where like ideas for artistic practice comes, like for instance in the presentation I was showing, during the presentation I was showing, at some point there was this, I can also come back to that, like this, one day I was like looking at this platform that like NASA created to like look at real-time atmospheric data, and I saw this interference. I was like, oh, that's interesting. What's going on there? And then I've been reading a bit about like basically like what kind of interference satellite could have. And I started having all this picture, and I was like, okay, that's like this is something interesting and weird at the same time. And then that becomes like these anomalies, like let's say this lack of information, these pixels missing, somehow become an entire, like at least my obsessions in the last like couple of years. So like understanding how climate data works, how climate models work, how we can map this intricacy that exists between technology, politics, and data, and all because of pixels missing in an image. So I think that, I don't know if it's related to what the comments that have been made, but most of the I guess the most interesting things come from anomalies, and that's how also artistic practice can like set their interest in. That's I really like the comment you read. I think it's very cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. I also think that also goes back to my first question about like this artistic practice that you have within an academic context. Now, this idea of imagination and imaging somehow brought together through the study of also the interface and the internet, the materiality that comes out. Like there's a lot of self-reflexivity that comes and opens up these spaces through the presentation itself. Great. So I think this
Thank
is
you, Mark.
also a nice place to maybe wrap things up, unless anybody has like a burning last question. Otherwise, where can people find you?
People can find me on the web. I want people can find me. People can find me on the email on my website. There is my email. But yeah, I think people know. People will find. People will type my name and probably find me somewhere. But email is great. And Instagram or whatever, Blue Skies or like.
And any upcoming show or installations or anything that you want to mention?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's like actually this project, like Unpredictable Atmosphere, is gonna be exhibited at the Venice Biennale, this architecture biennale in May. So that's an exciting news. I have also a magic team of collaborators, and then I'm very excited. Yeah, it's gonna be physical somehow.
So
And I hope
out in
to see some
Venice.
of you there. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope to be able to see it and to go to Venice to see the installation. Yeah, thank you from my side too. It's been a wonderful presentation, really nice, super interesting, very timely too, I guess, because of everything was going on with the weather lately. And yeah, and thank you to everyone who has joined, who's thanking as well on the chat.
Thank you so
We
much.
will be back in 2 weeks. So if you want to join us in 2 weeks, we will have another screen walk with Michael Berto on the 26th of February.